Okay, welcome back. So this is a follow-on from last week's. I like it when you guys come back with comments, questions based on the immediate previous one. And I'm betting I probably have addressed this numbers of times, but again, sometimes it's worth it. Well, for one thing, if I haven't given a title that's clear enough to for you to tell what I'm talking about, and this title I'm hoping is clear enough. And but the second one is it bears repeating and has other kinds of contexts that usually help us to grasp more of it. It helps me to discuss more aspects of it. But before I do that, let me thank Jillian C. Thank you, Jillian. And Jillian says an appreciation for your videos that I've watched. So that's really nice, Jillian. That's a thank you. And she says, comment, thank you. And Jimmy C., thank you for continuing to be such a major support for us. That's massively, massively appreciated. Okay. Yeah. So and keep those contributions coming. I think we're still hanging in there with paying my producer, and that's key. Okay, so let's see. I think I'll just go right for it. First of all, I'm just going to read the question because this question, and I think I'll discuss it fairly heavily, and then I'll show you a couple pictures. The pictures aren't quite as important this week as just following the couple of different little concepts here. But so Aiden says, a question that keeps me up at night. What should we focus on, values or colors? It's like a make up your mind question, isn't it? It's an interesting thing to say, what should we focus on? Because do we really want to do that in an exclusionary way? And where is the primacy? What's the primacy of this versus that? And what dictates that primacy? So those are kind of interesting and, I'd like to say in some sense marvelous questions, good ones to marvel at. So a question that keeps me up at night, what should we focus on, values or colors? I've heard so many times that value is more important than color, and I'm confused about which is the better approach. Thinking about values first or color? When you refer to color notes, is it more important to determine the color, or should we be evaluating both the value and the color simultaneously? Since every color has a value, additionally, is there a historical context for these two approaches, such as the differences between Impressionism and Tonalism? So this is from Aiden. Now, the way you end this, Aiden, the differences between Impressionism and Tonalism. So it sounds like you're saying when we paint from life, what's best to do? And that in that very last question is that difference. Is there kind of a historical? There is a historical context. That's why I bring it up from time to time. Sargent early on and others who come from tonalism is a funny word because it's taken on that whole meaning that comes out of Steichen and those guys, the tonalists. But painting from values to get light as the basis of the light getting versus some combination that includes color and chroma is a thing. And let me see if I can manage to stay on track here. And in one sense, both of them can be done impressionistically. Okay, what I mean to say is, the visual impression sans the color, sans color. The visual impression sans color is what I mean when I say tonalism. I mean, you paint light effects all day long. So it's like just a nice photograph with a beautiful light effect in it, black and white, such as it is, right? And so there is that. But I want to talk for a little bit about something else, and I'll cover with some pictures what is going on with a person like Sargent, not Sargent, but Degas when he's making a picture versus what I'm doing or what a Boston school is doing when he's painting the scene in front of you. It could be a portrait, could be a still life interior, or it could be a landscape. And if it's sitting in front of you, it's going to be one thing. If it's an imaginative picture, it's going to be something else. You're going to have to approach it slightly differently. You will find that you need to approach everything from the drawing. You're wise to think about the values scheme And then there's the color scheme, okay? The values plan, if you want to call it that, and to separate them. And I find that if you're going to do a color scheme, you don't know what the values are going to be. It's not helpful in working that way. But it doesn't mean you can't paint an imaginative picture using color values. In other words, having some idea what your color scheme is going to be doesn't, there's so many ways to do these different things. But on the other hand, there is to me, a definitively better way to approach it if you're treating it like the Boston School does. And that is from color, except by color, we mean a thing that contains a value and a chroma as well as a hue. So it's a color value thing, right? I don't know why that word color value doesn't say color chroma value. That comes out of Hale. So thinking about value first or color, when you refer to color notes, is it more important to determine the color? So what I will tell you straight up is if you're trying to hit a color note, the first question is what value is that color note? In my mind, the second question is what chroma, what intensity has that color note got? And if you get those two in the right direction, the hue is going to be relatively easy street for you. It'll just be a question of whether, if it's a blue, it's going to be more yellow or more blue or more red, if you follow my thinking. So you've established the value, you've established the intensity, and then but still, if you're an impressionist, you're doing that just to hit this color note. So this color note contains those already in it. So some darks over here, some lights over here, some blues over here, some reds down here, all different values and they're scattered across the field. Okay. So, and that is the impressionist when you're doing full color. That is the impressionist approach. I've described to you, and I'll do better, I'm hoping in the not too far future, of the values studies on mid-tone papers that we do, and the way you could establish the values scheme, much like you'd establish the color scheme. But so the thing to think about at the very beginning of a painting is you just out of the blue say, let's just say you're painting a Boston School, you're painting a life, you're painting a portrait of me, you're painting an interior with me in the corner, or whatever you like, a landscape, still life, all those things. It's incumbent on you to look at it as a color scheme and say something about it. Say, is this an intense color scheme or is this a fairly neutral color scheme? Things like that, right? Is this now? And then we come to the values. We talk about the general tonality. Is it a dark picture? Is it a light picture? And I don't care which one you're doing. So you're talking about this section right here, right? Viewfinder, the screen you're looking at. Is it a dark painting, a light painting? Is it a mid-tone painting? As a general tonality, it's just an expression, right? But you can tell because one of them would be painting on the beach. People standing on the beach, unless they're all wearing black, it's probably going to be a pretty light painting, or at least daytime painting. Or one of those nocturnes by Whistler is going to be just the opposite, and you'll just be seeing flecks of light in the midst of a sea of darkness, the opposite. So you need to know your values, the general value scheme. You need to know the general color scheme to paint an impressionist painting with any kind of authority. And the other part of it that we try to do is we try to get all the horses going at once. And I do mean by that, we mean minimally. You certainly mean the color, the chroma, and the values. And of course, there are more horses than that. But I'm saying, just if you're just scattering notes around, if it's just the right color, the right value, in the right place. By the way, again, he didn't say the right color, the right chroma, the right value in the right place, right? And he could have just said the right color in the right place, right? That's rather what Monet said. And by the way, that quote is from either Tarbell or Decamp. And half the people I know say one and half the other. But the question is, and I'll just do this with a picture in a couple seconds. I think I've covered what I wanted to do generally, so we should be evaluating. So should we be evaluating both the color and the value simultaneously? And so my point to you is that unless you're doing, and I found myself in this situation when I was really trying to verify a note was true, I had to make sure the color note, the value had to be right, or it just would not do the same thing. And so I don't know how to separate that. I just call it a color value or continuously say, and I found that I had to really work on getting the right value of the color. You're naturally going to pick it as a red or a yellow or blue, right? It's going to be somewhere in there. And then but you need to consistently say and conscientiously and in a disciplined manner say, and what is the value of it? At which point you'll look around to see what the lightest light and darkest dark are. And you'll also look around to see where it lives in the chromal range. For example, if a color, at whatever value it is, makes a silhouette against another color by being lighter or darker than that color, you have to have it capable of doing that, right? And whatever intensity it is has to be like all the other intensities that are in its class in the place, or it has to be, if it's the richest one, then it has to be that. But if you have a rich note and you don't get the rich quality, it's going to be very hard for you to see the color quality. So I'm just saying that I've found that I can't do one without the other. Color is like that. And I'm just painting with the color that's in front of me. So it means you have to get the value in the chroma right there on the spot. Now, you're probably thinking that, but I'm saying I really do prioritize color and chroma. I'm sorry, value and chroma over hue. I really am saying that. On the other hand, nobody's going to grab in a yellow area a blue, right? So in a sense, you could say, well, we are really prioritizing hue. We picked a blue. And but you'll be wise, instead of picking that blue and going through red, yellow, and blue, to say, okay, there's a blue. That looks like it's probably about the right one. Then say, now, how dark is it? How chromatic is it? And finally, do the red, yellow, and blue thing. And I think you'll find yourself getting there faster. I do. So if you're just trying to make a likeness of the world in front of you as it is in full color and not doing a grisaille, if you're doing a grisaille, if you're doing a black and white study, it's a whole different game. At that point, all you have is darkest dark and lightest light and what happens where they meet. And all the other values, of course, in between, and all the great fields of values, from that blurred eye perspective, your blurred eye see how values hang together and et cetera, but conversations you'll find in other places. So let me read this quickly again. A question that keeps coming up, keeps me up at night, and I like that. I like, Aiden, that means you have a future. What should we focus on, values or colors? I've heard so many times that value is more important than color, and I'm confused about which is the better approach. Now, is value more important than color? I'm telling you, you can't see without values. And you don't really make pictures that are entertaining if you don't have values. Color is fun, but the values create points of interest. It's the value contrast that does that. Plus other things, like busynesses, which is a whole series of value contrasts side by side, that sort of thing. The noisiness of, say, my finger group with gashes in between them. Those things are also factors. But you can't see it all if you don't, you need light and you need dark. And so I'm saying that design-wise, you wouldn't say you're going to get much fun out of a picture if you don't have value differences. Color won't do it for you. On the other hand, I'll just show you some pictures, but you'll see that pictures aren't fun unless they're colored. And I mean, some pictures more so than others. But, as a decorative problem, we don't hang big black and white photographs on our wall to decorate. We hang colored stuff on our wall. When people paint murals, they don't paint black and white murals. That does not do the job. There are times when you could do like some of the Puvis murals where they're really muted, they're really reduced down, but they're still colored and they're still serving that purpose like that. So is it more important in that sense? Yeah. You can't make pictures, you can't give me the same quality of entertainment without some combination of the two. But in laying it in, if you're an impressionist, your approach is color values. And that field of color values, and just think Monet, it really is a lesson for all time. We're talking about a distribution of color values across a page. That's what you're seeing in front of you here. And it's either interesting or not interesting. And every time you make drawing, we're trying to get the color at the right value. So when I say drawing, what I mean by that is silhouette. Every time you try to make a silhouette, Degas says, what did he say? It's all silhouettes. But when you're trying to create a silhouette, you're trying to do it with two different values meeting. And the silhouette is the first area of eye interest. Your eye goes right straight to the most powerful silhouette in pictures. Some people would say to the lightest light, but that's on a presumption that the picture is a generally dark picture, which was more common once. So now, I think that gets us started. And I'll just look at a couple pictures and see if anything else comes up. But thinking about value first or color, I think I've covered that. Or is it more important to determine the color, or should we be evaluating both the value and the color? So I think you're on to the conversation. That's the way we think. But there's no such thing as simultaneous. It's not wise to think that way. So the color value is color, value, and chroma, and you're thinking about these things. You have to separate them from each other to do them well. You have to think of each aspect of the note. The note is a color, value, chroma note. Okay? All right. And so that's the note. And if you don't get the value right, you won't get the silhouette, right? You won't get the light effect. And to the extent that we mean that, by that we mean the way the light glows because the dark is such and such with such and such an edge at the joint that it makes it feel like it's a glowing something or other. So we need the value to produce that. The drawing is a product of that. The significant drawing, that is the drawing that so we say leads the way, gets our gets our eye's attention from the first. That's entirely a values-related place. And we also, as you know, we go around making points of interest by value contrast. In our way of working, my way of working, when I call it the arabesque, we go around making that pattern created by those things at the top end of the power structure, the high contrast spots and how they relate to each other. That's all a values thing. You can't do that with color by itself, and we need that. That's part of our approach. Okay, so I'll talk about the start here in just a second. I think I have an image or two of it. Yeah, and so I've already given you the rest. Okay, so let's just talk about this. Here you have two images. One is the classic Monet, and the other one on the right is a Steichen, which you may or may not have seen before, but that's in the sort of the class of what sort of, I almost believe it led to tonalism, early photography. I almost wonder if it did. This world of very shallow value ranges and what you can get out of that, and sort of the mystery, the magic, and all that sort of stuff. If you're an impressionist, you might wonder if that was. It's funny because these things are really happening pretty nearly simultaneously. The Monet experiment and the daguerreotype or whatever. I'm thinking the Civil War in the United States. When you see that most. The earliest. But nevertheless, you can see in the right one there, it doesn't require color to be magical. And a lot of what I think of as tonalist painting is like, it's largely, like this one here looks sort of like a blue. I think it originally was just a black and white photograph, so I don't think it's intended to look like a blue, but tonalism does that. It tends to live, and I've talked about people like Albert Moore and others, they tend to live in these sort of zones of yellow and zones of, you remember that we talked about that? You might look up that video, whatever of one, oh golly, how did I describe that? Of one color, making a composition made out of one color. Oh, I'm so sorry, I can't remember that. Anyway, there's a video, maybe 20 back or so, that talks about that, featuring Albert Moore. So that is a thing, right? But if you're looking at a field like this Monet, it's going to be about the color. It's the message. I mean, you're going to say, man, I got to show you this thing that I saw. You're not going to achieve that quality by painting a black and white painting. And nobody's looking for you to do that. I mean, again, but you can see that the approach is, you could say it's color first, but every color has a value. So you'd never get you'd never get that, even the feeling of hay, if you didn't have that broken value stuff. That's value stuff. So, so I don't know. That's, how do you approach it? That's a classic case, the Monet, of it's a color value problem. And that's what Hale, who spent a bunch of time down there, I mean, like maybe, did he go over there 9 times to the Giverny? Maybe 9 different years to work alongside Monet, or in the vicinity of hearing him. But you can see the emphasis isn't on drawing sharp edges and stuff like that. So if I go to here's another example where you could say, well, this is Ang is sort of famously all about the drawing, and so is Degas, really, in one sense, all about the drawing. Except obviously that's not quite true, is it? So is this a better picture with no color? But then on the other hand, how does he approach it? And that's where you'd say he approaches everything from the drawing and from the values. Grisaille is just a values study. right? It's just organizing the values. So you can do that. This kind of painting, it's probably better to do something like that. It's very slightly different the way Jerome does it, but not much. You can see he does things that are sort of muted colors, distributed in different places, but they're really trying to be right in their value relations. And that's just an approach. So you can take it, but again, we're talking about two different kinds of painting. This isn't Impressionism. If I was painting this thing, I would have started hitting color value notes right off the top. I'd want to know what my most chromatic note was, what my darkest dark is. And it wouldn't be long before I was trying to establish the power of the light effect in the chief areas and get some of that conversation going, parts in relation to parts in relation to parts. And then we gradually close in on the drawing, shall we say. We bring the drawing up as a slight second. But again, remember, it's color values. So do you have to say it's one or the other? They're color values. So as I said, if you want to say it, do say it's color values, but if you don't get the values right, nothing happens good in this picture. Okay? We need to know what the lightest light and darkest dark is, even in a color impression. Okay? So this is an example. The one on the right you've seen before. It's a demonstration I did. But you can see what I'm doing is spotting colors around and slowly coming to drawing. And it is a color values problem, though. I am really trying to use silhouettes, things like that, or this spot here, or this exit here, or that powerful area there, plus this, etc. And you can see that all my work is trying to set up spots like that. It's a huge, that's what you might call the inventory of the effects. That's a values production thing. But I do it with the color value. I'm not doing weak colors. I'm trying to match color. I'm trying to match color is a funny thing. I don't mean it that way, but I'm trying to get this color right to all the other colors in the picture so that it actually is producing all the way along. It's producing the impressionist, producing the big impression. The big impression, as I said before, it means the color scheme, the big impression, the color scheme, the light scheme, the values, the general tonality, the value scheme, et cetera. Okay, and of course the order visual. It's going to have in it the set of the things that are most powerful, and the declining levels of sets of things that are secondary in relation to those things. So that's how you bring it out of pure impressionism. So when Degas says he's an impressionist, he says I'm an impressionist in line. He's not this kind of impressionist. He's not setting a girl up in the bathtub and then trying to paint the scene. He is not that kind of an impression. This is not a portrait of a girl. This is an imaginative painting. And you can see what he does with color is he says, let's put this woman down here on a yellow piece of paper. And that begins his discussion with himself about creating a color scheme based on that yellow, right? So whatever he's finding in this picture, perhaps it would be just the white and finding the right blue for that white, finding one that he likes in relation to this kind of stuff. Do you see what I'm saying? But this is a search for a color scheme, where the values are presumed based on drawing, shall we say? I don't know how else better to say that. She's got dark hair. She's got light skin. This is a light, blah, blah, blah. And this whole thing is a middle tone. That's just a coincidence. He's just making a picture up out of his head. So how would he best do that? Obviously, he's going to draw the figure first, and he's going to do what he does know. And he knows, for example, that the hair is dark. It's going to be one of the darks. I mean, that sort of thing. I'd say that meaning that's the figure gives you that. It's a white cloth. It's a middle tone body. You have a dark, a light, shall we say, and a middle tone set of values. And he's going to live somehow with that in that sort of world. But it's all imaginative. So he's not going to approach the whole thing the same way as this. He's approaching everything from the drawing. And then it becomes a question of the values. And as he was working, it becomes a question of, but he's, in a fun way though, he's really doing all three at once, right? He really is doing color value, but in as spots, but with a different motive slightly. So now, but this is a pretty fun example in my view of pictures. They come to sort of the same places, in some sense, sort of the same picture, except that this is not an impression. This is impressionistic. In other words, it is in the class of something that looks like it has broken color and broken values and a lot of color and an impression of the light and all that sort of stuff. But it's not. The approach is different. So the question is, what did he do first, second, and third in this? You figure that out, but he did not have the same opportunity this person had. That's Benson, and that's Degas. He didn't have, this guy has a simple, he can just simply say, what's my darkest dark? And you start getting some of that up there and some of that. And they can say, what's my lightest light? And start talking about other things, talk about spots of this and spots of that and spots of this, just like a Monet. And every once in a while, pulling off an effect and getting that into the conversation. But you see that the effect in the conversation means you have to have your values right. But he's doing it with color values. You expect him to get the right color of the value he's working on. So while this may appear to be about the same darkness as this, it's the red of that dark group. This one is redder. This one's got more green in it. Blah blah blah. So you could see that to get these silhouettes, you have to have your values right. Okay, but he's making them out of color values. So he's already seen what the plan is. He's seen this. This is a picture that's dark on the top half with some spots of dark in the light in the bottom half, with that's spotting out into the background, forming making patterns against the darks. He's already seen that. He's already seen what relative level of chrome in this picture is. It's sitting in front of him. He's not making it up. But Degas is making it all up, right? And he's heading toward an imaginative version, or shall we say, an impressionistically plausible likeness. So what does he do first, second, and third? Again, he's talking about what's given. He's got girls with dark hair. And he's seen them in this light, and he knows there's going to be a dark here, and there's spots of dark over here. He may know that there's a wooden door here, and he's going to use that. So he knows what color it is. This may be setting up his entire scheme. But ultimately, this guy is doing imaginative work, and so whatever notes he gets down here, he's using orange and green to make it up, and you find him distributing orange and green in variations all through this whole painting. But you see that that's a decorative motif. It's got a different intention. Nevertheless, so this is now one of those things I want to say about the imaginative worker. Do I have a picture by one? No, let's not go to his. But the imaginative worker actually wants this to be a beautiful color scheme, purely in the abstract sense. The imaginative worker wants it to be a beautiful decorative scheme. So you see these blues here and how they're picking up on other ones, rather like blues as they head up here, maybe even scattering across through the area. And there's this whole blue distribution thing. There's a distribution of the greens, of the oranges, et cetera, et cetera. You can see what he's up to here. But you can see there's color distribution and there's values distribution, right? So in one sense, you have to say, well, what are you doing with the painting? Where are you coming from? What do you have for data? And before you make that finally, to make that decision about whether it's going to be the values first or whether it's going to be the colors first. So if Degas, and so many of these things, he takes a color, the board might have been this color. And he picks something. It might have been the color of these women. He might have picked that. Or he might have picked this as a door and, as the first thing. He might have done that and said, all right, he's just grabbing something for a place to start. And then he's trying to build a set of, shall we say, of red, yellow, and blue that corresponds, that creates a proper color scheme in the same sense as I say frequently, would you wear that? Would you wear that if that was a dress? Would you wear that? Et cetera. So, yeah, but so you figure it out. The one thing, let me show you one more picture and then I'll just make this sort of a final statement. I may as well talk about that one since we're passing it up. This is just what I'd call something in the class of tonalist painting. This picture has very low level color, and it's what color there is warm, and that probably has some effect on the story. But this is remarkably effective in pure black and white too, as a story picture, because it's so heavy in the values-based moods and things like that. Well, whenever you start with first, second, or third, you have to know what your world, that is to say, what your aesthetic statement is based on, and do well in it. right? So this whole thing is this large area of dark, muted. It's a dark picture, muted transitions fairly heavily into the lost and found thing, but a lot of lostness. So she's maybe in a cave here, maybe she's not. I think she's not, probably here by. But it sort of alludes to the idea of having him hidden in some sarcophagus somewhere where she gets to go. You know, I say him as his boy. It's a little sordid Boccaccio poem. It's again her boyfriend's head who's been murdered is being kept alive here. So you see the values, the lostness, the eeriness, all these things, they can be created by lost and found. The mystery really is created by lost and found. And the mood, which you could say is a little maddening, a little disturbing, et cetera, is also created by that sort of thing. It's very heavy into values first. And so it gives this kind of a nod to red, yellow, and blue. Now, if you set it up in a studio, it'll look like that, with the spotlight flashing on her and all that stuff. He still would have approached it the way we do. We would have been heavy on getting the values right, but he still would have been searching out the red, yellow, and blue-ness of the various notes, this being, shall we say, the red. And you can see this being maybe the yellow or variations throughout that thing of the yellow, or the blue, wherever it's, however it works out. Maybe it's that. So you can follow that he's still going to be doing color values if he's got somebody in front of him. Now, there's a different discussion, and that's what I wanted to just talk about briefly. You get benefit if you're working a relief in sculpture. The great beauty of relief is form, and the more you color it, the more you take away something away from this. So a huge part of what you're doing, even in those early decisions about whether it's going to be a values thing or whatever, if the thing you're painting is heavy into the form of what's in front of you, if it's beautiful, it's a great beauty is the form, and Ang so often sets up that way. Then the color thing will only take away from it. I'll give you an example. I'll give you this as an example. So if you haven't seen this before, I recommend you take a look at it and find maybe a better image than I have. But this is Imaginative, I believe, and this is a picture of Phidias working on the Parthenon reliefs. And this is the color version of it. And I can tell you the sculpture is so totally superfluous as to not even be needed here. Now I say that, I mean, they could have painted this dress here on this person like it was all one value, and the form may have been aided by the fact that it was sculptural, right? But you could just as easily have painted this whole thing in color, and it would have done exactly the same thing. You don't need the sculpture underneath it. So depending what you're trying to show or what that thing is that you're featuring, if you're a guy that's in love with form and everything you set up is heavy on the expression of the beauty of the form, then probably the last thing you want to do is let color take over in some awful way. But an impressionist can manage that if he knows about these these other possibilities, and he knows what the focus is, and still work from color first. But it still has to be, in working with color, it still has to be values as the entity of the color that you first clarify, make sure you're right about, and then, as I said, the intensity of the color, and then the distribution of the management of the more red, more yellow, more blue model. But I can't say that I think even for a second that I wouldn't rather see these Parthenon reliefs. Look at the magic of this patterning. That's going to get lost if you make one of these horses black and the other one white. And I don't know if the horses show up in that thing. Maybe they do. I guess they don't, but so you can't judge on that one. But you can see what it's doing up here. I mean, these white spots are way more dominant. The white, red, whatever the background, green. All you're seeing is patterning. All you're seeing is spotting. Which is all wonderful, but why is it a piece of sculpture? I know I'm off. I know I'm wandering off here a little bit. Sculpture, relief, all that sort of stuff is values-based. Form is a values movement problem. You can't do without it. And there's form in everything. And I say, by the way, even just the general projection in to create the sense of depth in a painting, the difference between, say, my hand here and something behind me, and then my head, something behind me there. All that stuff is produced by value contrast and that sort of thing more heavily than it's produced by color. And that's a real thing. So I'm just saying, don't ever misunderstand that values are huge. But if you're an impressionist, you're actually not tying one hand behind your back and saying, I'll get to the color, I'll get to the color later. You're actually saying just the opposite. You're saying, because my tendency is to be so heavily reliant on the drawing, I'm going to do the color values first. And when you say, I'm going to do the color first, and when you say that, you even put intensity over you, but you're still saying, I'm going to do the color values first. And then everything else will follow that. We go right straight after that to find the silhouette, which is the perfection of the values. But it's a combination of when a dark meets a light, say my finger and my thumb over here, when a dark meets a light, you definitely are going to get a color thing, right? But you got to nail the values thing there, and you got to have it right to other ones in other places, other value contrasts in other places. You can't get out of it. But we're definitely, if you're an impressionist, you're going to do it with the right color value. Heavy emphasis on the value, heavy emphasis on the intensity, and then make sure you get the beauty of the red, yellow, blue in this field of color that just makes it so magnificent. Looking back at that Degas for a second, that whole thing about the distribution, the red, yellow, and blue, you might say as a decorator, this is easy. You could easily see this on a plate or on a cup or something like that as a beautiful color scheme. You might find it less easy to see that one as a beautiful color scheme. But the fact is, when you're an imaginative painter, that's what you're, as it were, scheming for. You can make that stuff up. In nature, you've got to take what's given to you. And, so what's there and the way it's happening, you're going to have to see what nature is delivering. And even grabbing a section of nature through your viewfinder, you're looking at it to see how much of this quality, how much unity it inherently has in all these different ways, coloristically, and in this case, the wonderful, delightful distribution of the spots. So I don't know. I've already answered the question right from the beginning. The answer is you do color values, and the first part of color is values, but you're still hitting a color note if you're a Boston School type impressionist. Now, I'm going to end this by saying, now don't assume that means one must always do this, one must always do that, and you're wrong if you do this, and we're right. I'm telling you, every method is determined by what you want at the end of the day. If you want the beauty of the light effect, if you want the beauty of the color, if you want the beauty of the form, if you want all these things, and even the beauty of shape, for its own loveliness, you're gonna find a methodology that'll deliver all of them in a beautiful concert, and woven into each other. You'll be in values for a second, and chroma for another second, and shape another one, and it's all going to be woven together. So the drawing is everything, as Hale would like to say, and and that's the thing that makes this so much delight. As I said, it's more like a symphony at that point. You're actually directing an entire, body of musicians, all different kinds, so to speak. Yeah, maybe I've said enough. I've always said enough, it seems to be. How beautiful is that in color? And you wouldn't want it in black and white. So how important is color? It's important to have color schemes. I've said before that the Italians said this is an art of color. I don't know if they didn't have black and white in those days, right? It was just taken for granted. It's an art of color. So to have an art of color and not actually make beautiful color schemes, what is that? So you're not saying that. I know you're not. And I'm not saying anything about, depending on what you're doing. If you're painting the color scheme of something that's sitting in front of you, you have your work cut out for you, right? And what is best practices? So if you're an impressionist, Boston School type, or even painting a portrait, really a true portrait, you're going to be into color and values in a concerted way, in a way in which they both are fully at play. All right. I love that. I love this beautiful little thing. This is supposed to be Raphael in the Foreign Arena. Raphael, of course, Bing Yang's favorite guy. All right. What's not to love? These kind of set up two different worlds, but you can paint the light effect using relatively muted colors and all that sort of stuff, and have a true light effect. But the general impression, the impression that is rich with atmosphere and all that sort of stuff, there's an element of color that's needed for that. And you might say, to finish the course of your education, you want to be able to do both and all. Maybe it'd be the best way to say it. Okay, I'm out of here. Thank you, Aiden, for that question. Stephen, I'm wishing you well. I'm continuing to wish you well. Thank you for being there for us all this time. Thank you again, Jimmy C, Julian C, and I better make sure that's who. Yeah, Julian C. Yeah, and Jillian. Sorry, not Julian. Jillian C. And for all the rest of you, thank you for sharing, liking, subscribing. Keep it up. Keep it coming. It's been a lot of fun lately, and now I think I'm up to. I'm just telling even Mr. Producer right now for the first time. I'm thinking up to clearly 8 whole people who are interested in doing an online thing with me. What that thing is, first of all, it starts as a conversation. Some of you are calling it a course. I don't know what it'll be. A class. I don't know what it'll be. It's not a workshop necessarily, but maybe it'll be whatever you suggest, whatever you want it to be. So if you guys keep asking me, and even you guys have already addressed me about it, suggest what would be valuable to you. I've answered some of you saying, could you tell me what I can do that might be the most beneficial to you? Doesn't mean I'm going to take that, but if I hear that, I'll probably be able to build it in some. So sort of sort that out. But take a conversation like this in which you're across the room and you could then say, but when you're doing this, how would that work? Or whatever it would be that you would contribute to that. So that's my first picturing of that, is to have a conversation where you guys get to push it. And the second part would be to maybe look at your work, maybe look at work, and then extend the conversation via something you might be doing that is perhaps an extension of what I've been trying to teach, as it were, via this video podcast. So, is this a podcast? But I'm really good on technology. All right, folks, I hope you have a great week. I really wish you well.